went to a special program every Wednesday night, and I no longer do it.
Okay. Look at all these fantastic people popping in here. Hi, Merle. Always good to see you. Look at this crew. Come on in, everyone. There we go. Come on in. Come on in.
Do we let just everybody in? Really?
Not just any, only the very, very special people. Look, there's your son is here.
Yeah, well, that's the first time he showed up on anything that I do. So that's, you know, maybe
Picasso is in the house. Michael Janowski's in the house. This is impressive work, everybody. There we go. Merle, of course, is in the house. I love it. Jay, Jill, Michael Wax. Talia. People are connecting. Ah, Mary Meadow. Hi, Mary. Jody. Jody's popping on too. Which is very exciting. All right, we'll give it another minute. We got a couple people. I see some people are making the choice not to turn on their video, which is perfectly fabulous. You know, we have the opportunity, you'll have the opportunity to unmute yourselves later to ask questions, or I will also be monitoring the chat, so you can send me or Rabbi David's or to everyone questions to be discussed. Either way, we'll try and get to your questions a bit later as well. So with that, so this is very interesting. I'm super excited for today because we have a very special person here who has been leading our Torah study on Friday a few times already, which has been fantastic. So you've had an opportunity to learn with him the Parshat Shavua. But today we're going to be having a conversation a little bit different in honor of Yom Yerushalayim, or Jerusalem Day. I purposely did not say your name yet because I need to just say something about that first, if that's okay with you.
You talking to me?
I am talking to you.
You talking to me?
Oh, yes. Okay. So earlier, Rabbi David asked, he emailed me, he's like, can we call each other by our first names? And I said, yes, but really what I meant was he should call me by my first name, but I can't call him by his first name because, you know, as one of my great teachers, right? I look to him as one of my rabbis, Rabbi Stanley Davids. So Rabbi Davids, I'm going to call you Rabbi Davids, but you're going to call me David.
No, I may call you something else.
But it's an honor to have you here, especially on this day where we're celebrating, which is an interesting word to choose, for Yom Yerushalayim. Is that Hannah? Hannah Davids is here. Rabbi Davids, your granddaughter Hannah is also chilling with us. I love it.
Hi.
Hannah, shouldn't you be in class? Eli's in class right now.
I just finished.
Oh no, he just finished. He's having lunch. I'm sorry. He just told me I'm not in class. That's amazing. Oh, that's really special. So for Yom Yerushalayim, this Jerusalem Day, what does that mean, Jerusalem Day, that we are going to be discussing today? Yom Yerushalayim is the 53rd anniversary of the unification of the city of Jerusalem, the modern city of Jerusalem. And what does that mean, the actual unification? Because I think that this conversation of what is the unification of Jerusalem plays out in a much larger context in what does it mean, the relationship between America, the Jews of the United States of America, and the Jews of Israel, or the population of Israel. A lot of the challenges at best between our two communities stem from some issues that come with this idea of Yom Yerushalayim, and in a bigger context as well. And we have actually with us in Rabbi David's one of the top thought makers, the top kind of voices in the progressive movement in both America and Israel on this this deepening divide that is both a challenge and an opportunity. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi David's for some opening remarks, and we're going to continue our dialogue from there.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Eshel.
No.
It's really great to be with everybody. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
And to be able to spend a little bit of prep time before Shabbat actually begins is a special honor. Yom Yerushalayim, deals with the reunification of Jerusalem, and I remember that so very well. I mean, the Wednesday of the 6-Day War, when Jerusalem, the Kotel, when there was a reunification 53 years ago. Is that hard to believe, David? 53 years ago. Unbelievable. And Jerusalem has been a part of the Jewish story since the time of King David, when King David, in the year approximately 1000 BCE, conquered the city of Jerusalem, Ir Shalem, the city of peace, Yerushalayim, and made it his capital. And then his son Solomon built Beit HaMikdash, the temple there. And that became, emblematic, if you will, of the whole connection between the Jewish people and the land of Israel. Im eshkachech Yerushalayim, if I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its cunning. I'd like to thank David for having invited me to, you can do that, invited me to share with you part of my real passion in life. That is to say, what is going on in Israel, what is happening in Israel, and how that directly relates to us as citizens of the United States of America. Before I begin, I want to be able to thank all of the members of Wilshire Boulevard Temple, and please, you can tell all of your friends or post it on Facebook. You jumped in and participated with the leadership of David Eshel in the election campaign for the World Zionist Congress. I want you to know that the reform movement emerged with great success out of that campaign. One of the largest improvements we had from the election 5 years ago was the incredible number of voters who participated from Wilshire Boulevard Temple. You guys did magnificently. Thank you for that. That victory translates into power, positions, and let's face it, money as well in support of the reform movement in Israel. You should know that your participation really mattered, and it mattered at such a level that David and I were getting praise all across the leadership of the reform movement. Hey, you did a great job with Wilshire. No, the people of Wilshire did a really great job. David, as we're starting, you're Israeli born. What does Jerusalem mean to you as a person, as a Jew? What does Jerusalem mean to you?
That's a really interesting question. Being also, growing up most of my life here in America and having Israeli parents, the first time I went to Israel, or the first time I went to Jerusalem, I was 13 years old. We didn't even go, even living there as a child or visiting, once we were here and going back and forth. I didn't go to Jerusalem until I was 13 years old, after my bar mitzvah, after we were here and then for a trip for the bar mitzvah. Because Jerusalem was always this kind of far off, different place. Like when people refer to Jerusalem, even living in Israel, right? When one moves to Israel, it's called what? Making aliyah, right? But even within Israel, going to Jerusalem is also making aliyah to Jerusalem. It's not just traveling to Jerusalem. It's not taking a drive to Jerusalem, but it's making aliyah to Jerusalem. So even within Israel, there's this different idea, this different feeling that a combination of the Israel of the reality and the Israel of the dream. And when I was younger, I didn't really understand what unification and separation actually meant. I always thought of Jerusalem as, yeah, of course, this is Israel's capital. This is what we do. But it wasn't until I was in my mid to late 20s when I had moved back to Israel and really exploring and living in Jerusalem and really exploring what the city had to offer, that there really are two different worlds, or multiple worlds, really. Like, even as a Jew, you have a secular world and a very religious world in Jerusalem. And then even as being a citizen of the world, you have Muslim Arab Jerusalem, and then you have Jewish Jerusalem. So to me, it gets very complicated, this idea of unification, because when you take a look at the city, it's not a unified city, right? It really is divided. And there are parts of the city where you can stand and see a clear distinction: East Jerusalem, West Jerusalem, the buildings, the architecture, the sounds, the smells really are separate. So I wrestle with this idea of what does it mean to be a unified Jerusalem. But still today, it's when I go to Jerusalem, I feel different, even just being in Israel, than I do in Tel Aviv. There's more energy, there's more tension, there's more passion.
All of
for
that.
Jerusalem to me. What's
Yeah,
that?
all of that. I remember one time when we were in Israel, one of our daughter and her kids had come to visit, spend some time. We were in Jerusalem where we were living, and then we went down to down to Tel Aviv to visit. Went to her hotel, and the lifeguard, the matzil, right? The lifeguard came over to us, didn't know us, and he said, "Do these grandchildren, do these children know how to swim?" I said, "Yeah." Speaking in Hebrew, whatever, yeah. And he said, "But where do you come from?" I said, "Batim Yerushalayim." I came from Jerusalem. He says, "Then none of you were swimmers." I mean, it was just like an attitude. Okay, so we're talking about unification and being united, being a good thing, a challenging thing, as David mentions, definitely challenging, but a good thing. Yet in the Jewish world today, there is a great distance between the diaspora Jewish community and the Jewish community in Israel. If unity is important and unity is a good thing, and we should be trying to put things back together. After all, the word shalom comes from shalem, which means, united together, put together. Then this gap between the Israeli Jewish community and the diaspora Jewish community is extremely troublesome. And what we're going to be doing in the next 45 minutes is talking a little bit about the reasons for the separation, but we're not going to leave it there. We're going to try near the end. I'm going to show this book, which of course, that's shameless publicity, marketing. Okay. Oh, you have one too, which we'll talk about the book. But the point of the book is we're not going to leave you with a question and a problem. We're going to leave you with a suggested path which we could all take in trying to deal with the question at hand. The strength of our commitment to Israel is a tough thing to talk about today. Besides just being bitten by the cat, it is a time when we're dealing with isolation and separation and fear and political anxiety and all of the problems I know that all of us are facing. I'm going to ask if we can keep that real concern and anxiety, but open up a little bit, because we're going to be moving past the pandemic. And when we do, there is a real world out there which we're going to have to think about. Okay, so what are some of the key issues that lead to the distancing and the separation between the diaspora Jewish community and the Israeli Jewish community? I'll just list a few. They're kind of important. Religious freedom, civil marriage, divorce, private burial practice, conversion, surrogacy, the woman's place in the public sphere, public transportation on Shabbat. These are the questions which are in the process, not only of, I don't want to say shattering, but tearing at some of the edges of Israeli society, and at the same time, making it very difficult for American Jews living in an American democratic society to relate to what's going on in Israel. I remember the very first time I was in Israel, living there during a political campaign, and I noticed that, for example, people running for city council in Jerusalem were advertising on all the city buses, and the leading candidates had no pictures, no names on the buses. I couldn't figure out why, being happily naive. I did ask, and it's simple. The Haredim inside Jerusalem would not permit women advertising for political position on the city buses. What? Wait a second, what about freedom of speech? That's how I was initiated into, if you will, how all of these issues play out. I have a burial plot, which I do not intend to occupy in the near future, but a burial plot on the outskirts of Jerusalem. I had to go through an incredible series of contortions to be able to guarantee that, no, my funeral service will not be conducted by the Rabbanut, but it's going to be a service according to my taste. But that was a political struggle, So here I am, I'm a citizen of Israel, I'm a citizen of the United States, and we're looking at this gap based upon serious civil concerns. My desire as a Reform rabbi, I officiated at the marriage of two first cousins in Israel. Well, I didn't exactly officiate because what I did had no standing. They had to go, one to Cyprus, one to New York, which are technically not, New York is technically not part of Israel, and get married again. I could do the Jewish officiation, but what I did in the eyes of the Israeli government, because of the connection between the chief rabbinate and the Israeli government, what I did didn't count. Now, how do you think I felt about that? Not great. And that became part of the motivation for my trying to understand how American Jews, liberal, social justice Jews, can become involved in what is developing as a society inside Israel. But David, that raises a problem for me. As an American citizen, should I have a voice in civil society in Israel? What gives me the chutzpah to do that? I mean, how do you react to it? Well, and here you want to maybe talk about shlichim too, because I know that's really important to you.
Yeah, I think the answer is On one foot, yes, but not necessarily in the way one may think, right? We don't necessarily, like, we don't live there. We don't live the day-to-day to vote and all those kind of things. But I do believe that we can have a say in shaping what the country looks like and what civil existence looks like through direct relationship with Israelis and specific group of Israelis, right? Some of you may know that I spend my summers at our summer camps, Camp S. Kramer and Gindling Hilltop Camp. This would have been my 20th summer at camp on the physical, even though we will still be running virtual camp, so I'm going to count it as a summer. But every summer we bring anywhere between 15 and 20 Israelis, young Israelis, to come to our camps as counselors and emissaries, right? They're called shlichim, or emissaries, where they come here thinking that they are coming specifically to teach about Israel, but what happens is they become transformed as well, right? They are exposed to a way of expressing and living Judaism that they had no idea existed, right? Even though there are beautiful, beautiful things happening in Israel in the progressive movement, in the liberal movement, in the reform movement, with phenomenal leaders and beautiful communities, but they're being exposed to the greater Israeli society, not so much. So these Israelis come, and who are these? They are early 20s, usually just about out of the army, either just finishing the army or out of the army for a year or so. And they go through rigorous training and screening process. So these Israelis who are coming over are really the top of the top, right? The real future leaders of the country, innovators of the country. And they come and they're exposed to a new way of living Judaism. And it never fails that 2, 3, 4 of the women become bat mitzvah, where they read from the Torah for the first time ever. Like, oh my God, am I allowed to actually do this? Touch the Torah, be close to the Torah. And the men as well, wanting to lead prayer services, wanting to express themselves in a Jewish way, right? So they become transformed, and in doing so, taking our progressive American Jewish ethos, if you will, back to Israel. And the disconnect there is then taking these Israelis who have their eyes opened, a new way of thinking, right, to then expose them to all the beautiful things that are happening in Israel and progressively in the progressive movements. And this group of people who are the cream of the crop, the top of the top, to organize them in a way for them to enter into social discussion and politics and really being the change makers, right? So I think the answer, to make a long story longer, I think the answer is yes, but not in the traditional way of being able to affect change, maybe with policy and those kind of things. Though, that being said, a little dig. And I think the answer can be seen, I think I shared this with you, Rabbi David, in the flag of Israel, right? And yes. I use this in my teaching with children, but it is a very deep concept. The flag of Israel, right? The symbols of the flag of Israel do not just represent the people living in the state of Israel, unlike, say, the flag of the United States of America, the 50 stars, 50 states, the 13 stripes, the 13 original colonies. This clearly represents Americans living in America, right? But the flag of Israel does not solely represent the people living in Israel, right? It represents Jewish people living all over the world, right? Because what does it model on? The Magen David is a global Jewish symbol, and the white and blue stripes of the flag represent the talit. It was based on a talit, the prayer shawl, right, that we wear, that Jews all around the world wear. And that being said, it also doesn't necessarily represent other people living in Israel. So the sheer fact that you made a decision, a conscious decision, the founders of Israel made a conscious decision that this flag represents the Jewish world, it can't just be in name only. right? It can't just be a symbol, right? But it is really about a dialogue.
So we look for Yom Ha'atzmaut. You mentioned David. Today, actually, Yom Yerushalayim. Today, Yom Yerushalayim. Right. The mayor of Jerusalem, Leon, was asked on a Haredi news broadcast yesterday, what about the
Rabbi
role,
David, what's Haredi? Maybe just to define Haredi.
Ultra-Orthodox. Was asked, what are you going to do with the religious challenges at the Kotel, the Western Wall, because of the Reform Jewish pressure, the women of the wall, to be able to pray there. And the mayor elected, democratically elected mayor of Jerusalem, Leon, said, "Hareformiyim inam Yehudim, zelo klum. Those reformers, they're not Jews. What they're doing isn't worship, not to worry. They don't belong at the Kotel." Well, I took a little blood pressure medication. I'm fine. It's not going to be a serious concern. But that troubled me a little bit. Now, we have to understand, we Americans sometimes get caught up in assuming that our definition of democracy is a universally accepted definition. That's not really true. Whether it's the UK, whether it's France, whether whatever, Germany, there are different forms of democracy in the world. Sometimes we are a little bit tunnel visioned and we think that what we have is democracy and what everyone else has that they call democracy is kind of like sort of democracy. Israel is a democracy. And the struggle in Israel is to try to develop a Jewish and democratic state, something which has never existed in human history. The democracy part of it is fascinating. There's no constitution, period, full stop. Israel has no constitution. Israel has no Bill of Rights. Israel has no clear separation of powers. Israel does have basic laws which keep getting passed a few every once in a while, which try to define the basic legal thrust of Israeli democracy with the intention that someday, efshar, maybe they will be combined into a constitution.
So there is an intention to have a constitution. I mean, those who declared the states, because we have a Declaration of Independence, right? There is a declaration.
The founders of Israel put off calling a constitutional convention because something weird happened right after Ben Gurion declared the state. Israel was attacked by 7 Arab countries. It made it a little difficult to convene a constitutional convention. That, friends.
Good afternoon.
No, thank you, Siri. Yeah, I don't want to talk to you. Go away. That convention was deferred. The deferred convention is still deferred. In other words, they never have called that convention. So you don't have a constitutional convention, but there are, please, I'm talking here. Israel has shelf constitutions, literally. Organizations, Israel Democracy Institute, other places, create constitutions, draw them up, put them in a shelf, and they wait. And their shelf constitutions are all over the place. And someday, theoretically, I will fly to Mars and they will convene a constitutional convention to adopt a constitution. They don't have it. They don't have it. I'm not cynical. I'm just descriptive. Then there is Megillat Ha'atzmaut. as David points out, there is the Declaration of Independence declared May 14, 1948. That is not law. The Megillat HaAtzmaut, the Declaration of Independence in the Israeli democratic structure, is aspirational. It is not legislation. That Declaration of Independence is a magnificent document. It is not law. We're going to see, based upon some of the conversations in this book, that there is real pressure to try to adopt Megillat HaAtzmaut as basic law itself.
Pressure from whom on whom?
There is pressure from the liberal center left because the lack of a constitution continues to obligate Israel to function within a coalition structure in which small parties have dictatorial power and all values can be sold for a vote for the next prime minister. That just happened 2 weeks ago. That just happened. To obviate that, to block that, there is pressure. So, for example, in the book, we're going to get to it, talking around, Eric Yaffe, Rabbi Eric Yaffe, the former president of the Union of Reform Judaism, vigorously advocated for Israel to move toward the direction of adopting the Megillah, the Declaration of Independence, as basic law. One of the great liberal legal minds in Israel argues with Rabbi Yaffe in the book because she is afraid that once you open up the discussion of whether religious freedom, equality for Arab, Jewish, Christian citizens is going to be considered for basic law, they will fight it. And it could rip the country apart. That's where we really are. It is a frightening reality that if we attempt to define Jewish and democratic, the result could be civil unrest. And I mean civil unrest just the way it sounds. Now,
did you know that there's this dystopian television show in Israel that looks like it's like a future, a dystopian future of Israel, where there is a religious state and a secular state divided by a wall, that because of it's based on this exact thing, this how they went into this discussion about the Declaration of Independence, and it fractured the community so much that they literally broke into two separate states.
David, I want to speak just to you with no one else listening. At a certain point in time, American democracy could only be defended through civil war. That was a necessary struggle. We have to ask ourselves whether getting involved in working with Israelis to try to move Israeli society, if that creates situations in which some people will take to the streets, that may be the only way to move Israel into a full embrace of democracy. And I, as a citizen of Israel, of the states as well, say that Israeli democracy, if not defended, will be lost. By the way, I would say the same thing about the United States of America. A democracy not defended will be lost. So the Central Conference of American Rabbis approached me and said, look, we are confronting this increasing gap, separation between diaspora Jewry and Israeli Jewry. David, we want you to bring together a book and a process, both, that simply has never existed before. Most times, American Jews stand off to the side and throw missiles of criticism toward Israel. We don't want that. We want to create a setting, a process in which American liberal Jews, Israeli liberal Jews can work together in equality and in full partnership to create change on the ground in Israel. That was how the book came to be done. My friends, this book, newly published, is in Hebrew and in English. The back cover, do you see it? Back cover. The book is in Hebrew and in English. The text, oh my God, is in Hebrew and in English. Every word printed in it. Why? Because, and this is the first book published by the Reform movement outside of a prayer book that is bilingual. The first one. Why? Because we're marketing the book in the United States and in Israel. And because every critique, criticism, suggestion, idea expressed in English is matched by an Israeli scholar, social activist who is speaking in Hebrew. This is a breakthrough possibility. And you may kind of tell from my affect that I'm kind of excited about this. Yeah, I am. I would tell you again, David, I'll just speak to you because I don't want this to get out. To get two scholars, one American, one Israeli, on every topic meant that the Israelis were writing in Hebrew because that was the way they would be most comfortable. We, the Central Council of American Rabbis, under my editorship, powerful, we had to get that essay in Hebrew translated into English. Then we had to edit
Market Smith, this is Harold.
the English. And then we had to get the edited English translated into Hebrew so the original author could agree or disagree with the edits. It took a year and a half to put all of this together. And the best part was, we're living in Santa Monica. It's a 10-hour time difference. My authors in Israel wanted to speak with me at 2 o'clock in the morning. And that's what I did. It could have destroyed my marriage, but it didn't do that. Now, what was the base of the book? We went to the Declaration of Independence. We took from the Megillah, from the Declaration of Independence, values statements. And then we assigned the value statements to a leading American liberal Jewish voice and to a leading Israeli Jewish voice. What were some of the value statements found in the Megillah? I'm glad you asked. So, for example, we are called, remember this was the declaration, so it was done in a hortatory fashion. We are declaring a Jewish state. Ben Gurion, you got to hear Ben Gurion's voice. My hair is long enough now, no haircuts. We are declaring the establishment of a state that will be based upon freedom, justice, and peace. That's a quote right out of the Megillah. And then we had authors assigned. Is this where Israel is today from an American Jewish liberal perspective, from an Israeli Jewish liberal perspective. Foster the development of the country for all of its inhabitants. Ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't say for all Orthodox Jewish inhabitants. It says for all inhabitants. Israel has Christian Arabs. Israel has non-Orthodox Jews. Israel has 20% today, 20% Muslim, Israeli, Palestinian citizens. And if you heard that labeling, that's how they refer to themselves. We are Muslim, Israeli, Palestinian citizens. They live in the country, but the Megillah says the development of the country for all its inhabitants. Now we know, again, this is just among us, that if you live in a Muslim village in Israel, you do not get the same level of national infrastructure support as a neighboring Jewish village. Period. That's fact. That's not emotion. That's a statement. The Megillah says that's not the way. Next, the Megillah says we will have a country that will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all of its inhabitants. Whoa! What if I am gay and in a gay marriage and I want to adopt? What if I want, as a gay couple, surrogacy? No. Because of the presence and the power of the ultra-Orthodox. By the way, in the United States, we kind of contemplate that there are 10 to 11% of American Jews are Haredi ultra-Orthodox. What's the percentage of ultra-Orthodox in Israel? Same percent. Are you surprised? Didn't you think it was going to be like 20, 30, 40%? They're so powerful, they're so coercive. No. No. What's the percentage of Reform and conservative Jews in Israel today? Real numbers. 8%. The total number of affiliated Reform and conservative Jews in Israel, 8%. The formal number of Haredim, ultra-Orthodox in Israel, 11%. Where does this end up being? It's fine to make everyone live according to a Haredi lifestyle when it comes to personal matters like marriage, divorce, conversion, surrogacy, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't work. The book addressed that. The Megillah says, we will make certain that this country extends freedom to everyone regardless of gender. That's in the Megillah. Regardless of religion. That's in the Megillah. So why can't I officiate at a marriage in Israel and have it recognized by the state? What we have created is a new form of Zionism. And I want to share that with you. It is going to be called social justice Zionism. It is a 21st century Zionism which seeks to build an Israeli society in which its Jewish identity and its democratic identity are equally protected. That's going to take a lot of work. So here are the rules defined in the book. Here are the rules. Israelis and Americans will work together in partnership and in full equality. It's no longer going to be a situation in which American Jews criticize from out there and Israeli Jews are left with the struggle to try to figure things out on their own. We want to have a grassroots effort in Israel created by American Jews and Israeli Jews working together. Oh, you say, how is that going to happen? Let me tell you that the reform movement today is fully committed to follow the blueprint here and to put serious money into the creating of programs in the United States, programs in Israel, working together to change the situation on the ground. This has never been done before. So, what does this lead to? I am obviously anxious in selling the book. I can even tell you, though I don't get any money out of the book, I can even tell you that I received authorization from the reform movement that if you buy the book now before June 4th, you can get the editor's discount. And all you have to do when you buy the book through CCR Press is to say, we want the discount for Deepening 20. That's it. That's the code. Deepening 20. And then you're going to be able to buy Deepening the Dialogue. Now,
Rabbi David, let me ask you a question about these percentages that you just brought up.
yes.
Because I think it's that middle percentage, that the difference between that middle 80%, right, on either end, that in the middle. So we have these other, if we're going to look at it as poles, right? It's the buy-in of that 80%, right? In America, the separation of church and state, right, is something that we work towards, and there is, I believe that there's more of a sense of legitimacy of different streams of Judaism within in America, even by those who are not religious or consider themselves cultural, or I'm Jewish by whatever. But in Israel, the non-religious, right, still say, well, the synagogue I don't go to is Orthodox. So it's given that more sense of legitimacy. So I think that it's that 80% that in between that we need to work with, right, to introduce them to this idea of what is.
There's
we just also
interesting phenomenon. There is an organization called Chidush, which is devoted to religious pluralism in Israel. They do the most sophisticated polling of any American Jewish organization. They use the Smith, Israeli Jewish, called Smith. They use the Smith polling agency, and they do the most highly regarded surveys. Guess what? The percentage is close to 75% of Israelis surveyed support religious pluralism, support the right of non-Orthodox Jews to organize and to function, support public transportation on Shabbat, support civil divorce and civil marriage. Wait. Did I just say 75%? Yeah, this is why if we get involved, we can make a difference, because when, for example, we had Israel had its most recent national election, the Russian party, Lieberman, the Russian party I think, got about 7 seats in the new configuration. The Russian party ran on a religious pluralism platform. When Blue and White, Kahol Lavan, began its campaign 3 elections ago, they were firmly on the side of religious pluralism. And many of the things I listed here, civil marriage, civil divorce, yeah. In the formation of a coalition in today's Israel, Lieberman was told religious pluralism will not be in the coalition agreement, and he refused to join the government. Blue and White split in half. Gantz, the head of the new Blue and White party, gave up on religious pluralism to get the support of the Haredim to work with Likud and to build a government. 50% of Blue and White stepped aside and went into the opposition. What's my point? David, you're totally correct. Totally correct that we have to work with that 80%. But the reality is that 75% of the surveyed over and over, not just a one-off, Israeli population actually wants this kind of democracy. They have to be empowered, and the social justice Zionism that this book has laid out and which the reform movement, as we speak, is preparing to move forward to implement, will make this happen. Will there be unhappiness? Yes.
Rabbi David, we only have 7 minutes and we have some questions. Do you mind if I open it up? I'm going to start with Michael Janowski. Will you please ask? I know you've been waiting beautifully, patiently and everything. Then Talia, you're up next. And then Jeff, don't worry, I got you.
So I'm curious about this. It seems clear to me, and especially with that last figure you cited, 75% support pluralism, and in as much as a quarter to a third of eligible voters in Israel don't even vote, why can't they find a candidate to rally behind? And why can't they find a candidate who will refuse to be co-opted? And if there is this great support for pluralism, you'd think there'd be some candidate somewhere who could mount a campaign. But as long as the government is captured by the right and with the financial support from America, I don't see how this goes anywhere when Israelis themselves have proved they don't seem to care.
Michael, that's terrific. Thank you for the question. There is a Hebrew phrase, Sulam Arachim, the ladder of values. Whereas the surveys clearly indicate that a large proportion of Israeli society supports civil rights, religious rights, pluralistic Judaism, on the ladder of values, it sits below defense. So that the same people who might vote out of fear defense things, and by the way, it is fully connected with the American presidential campaign. Just as in the US Senate, there is a mad rush on now to approve federal judges. That's not a political statement, it's a factual statement. It's going on right now out of concern that in November, the Republican community may lose control of the Senate. They want to get as many federal judges in that they can. The shift to Israel, there is a real concern that the kind of support that Israel has had from the American government may change after the November was a third election. And therefore, the people are voting heavily on defense issues. All of this will come to a kind of a resolution come November. And your question is beautiful. It's right. The people exist. We need to empower them. We need to partner with them. By the way, I know it's a long answer and I shouldn't do it. It's against the law. The major supporters of social action in the reform movement in the United States don't feel comfortable investing in Israeli social justice grassroots movement because they feel that kind of involvement is inappropriate. On the other side of the coin, the conservative community, Jewish community in America is lavishly supporting right-wing and conservative issues in the state of Israel. So what we are trying to do is to open the field up and to say that we American liberal Jews have a lot at stake if Israeli democracy is lost. David, go ahead, please.
Talia, go ahead, unmute yourself.
Hi, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thank you so much for putting this together and writing that book. I just wanted to share that as an animal rights activist and as a Jew growing up in the United States, I wasn't able to be aware of all of the laws that actually were in place. And in terms of like kashrut, and there was a big issue with how the kashrut was made like an exception for religious purposes, even though the way that they were hoisting and shackling and hoisting and slaughtering cows for kashrut was inhumane. That was like slid by because it was considered religious freedom. But there was a group that put a lot of pressure on that board, like in New York, you know, to like change that law and to update to more humane practices. And they kept putting it at the end of the minutes, and it was never addressed. And it only was addressed when this group, and Temple Brandon was actually working with, anyway, that group, they had to put a threat in a sense on that table, on that board meeting table in front of every single rabbinical board member, that they were going to expose it publicly and take it to all of the different animal rights groups. Now, as a woman and a Jew, I did not know about the rules or the laws, I should say, about divorce in Israel until Rabbi Nanas shared with us Get, you know, that movie. So there's probably a lot of voters in Israel. I'm not saying that they're naive. I'm not saying that they're whatever, they just may not know. And the problem is to make something public like that can raise a lot of anti-Semitism. So that's where I think there might be why a lot of Jews may not want to make it such like a big fight, because we risk more anti-Semitism in the world. Because if we would have made that public about how we were still, kosher laws were still slaughtering animals inhumanely, that would have done no good. You know, it's like
Talia, let me just respond only because of the time pressure. First of all, the world knows about hoisting and shackling. There's no secret. A number of Scandinavian countries have outlawed kosher slaughtering. There is no, so we don't have to deal with, let me just finish. We don't have to deal with letting the world know. The world knows. Secondly, the conservative movement started a very successful double kosher program in Israel and in the United States, which sets standards for humane slaughtering, but adds to it a social justice element, which means if you don't pay in the slaughterhouse equal wages, safe living conditions, if social justice doesn't guide the employment practices, those animals can never be kosher no matter what you do. So there is a real movement afoot within Israel to offer options. I would never, never fight against the ultra-Orthodox practice which they find required. What I want to be able to do, what a whole bunch of us want to be able to do, is to say there are higher and different standards of kashrut, and we embrace those. And that is really possible. And it's going forward, and it's happening. So I am not, you're totally correct in your evaluation, but be aware that there is significant change underway because people are lining up, and different forms of kashrut exist in Israel now. 5 years ago, didn't exist at all.
Because of the threat of making it public in the media and exposing the...
That was not so. I'm sorry. It's not because of the threat. It's because of a vociferous campaign to explain to people they made the changes in Israel without reference to how the non-Jewish world would look. Honestly, it is a successful educational campaign. Something
so with
for,
that, sorry. Here's what I'm going to suggest, because unfortunately we are out of time for today. But if Rabbi Davids is open to it, keep an eye out. We'll bring him back to continue this conversation and really delving a little bit more into the book and for us to really wrestle with these ideas. Because I think if you had the opportunity to actually take a look at the Declaration of Independence Israel, you'll be shocked. You'll be like, wow, I can totally wrap my head around this. I can absolutely wrap my head around this. And if there is, there are people, there's a voice in Israel that this is how they want to live, this is how they want to create, this is how they want to build, then I'm right there with them. So with that,
and also could I just point out, I am so available. Talia, I'd love to hear more from you. And
he is for sure available.
Rav, RAVDAVIDS, Rav Davids @gmail. And the important thing is the conversation. It's not my truth. It's the conversation. RAVDAVIDS @gmail. Or if you want, send all the letters to David and have him, no.
Well, thank you so much, Rabbi David, and thank you everyone else for joining today. I want to just wish everyone a big Shabbat Shalom, happy Yom Yerushalayim, interesting. And with that, don't forget to join us Thursday, right, Jody? Thursday evening, starting at 7 o'clock with our Shavuot service, moving right into all sorts of fabulous learning with your clergy all the way throughout the night. It's going to be amazing. So please check that out on our website.
You're a good person. Thank you, Jody.
All right. Bye, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for joining.